The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Riverside County Superior Court, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors as spectators filed into Courtroom 3B. The buzz of hushed conversations filled the air, punctuated by the occasional shuffle of papers and the soft thud of heavy law books being placed on tables. This wasn't just another criminal case. This was the trial that had captivated the entire community for months. The case everyone was talking about at coffee shops, school pickup lines, and neighborhood barbecues. Detective Maria Santos adjusted her navy blazer and surveyed the packed gallery from her seat in the third row. In her 15 years on the force, she'd seen plenty of difficult cases, but none quite like this one. The break-in at the Morales family home should have been straightforward. A simple burglary with a clear suspect and what appeared to be solid evidence. Marcus Chun, a 28-year-old construction worker with a minor criminal record, had been arrested 3 blocks from the scene with what prosecutors claimed were stolen items in his possession. It should have been an open and shut case. But nothing about this case had been simple. The problem sat in the witness chair at the front of the courtroom. 3-year-old Sofia Morales, a tiny figure nearly swallowed by the large wooden seat. Her small legs, clad in white tights and black patent leather shoes, dangled freely, not even close to reaching the floor. Her dark hair was pulled back with a pink butterfly clip that her mother had chosen that morning, hoping it might bring her daughter some comfort. Sofia wore a navy blue dress with small white flowers, her favorite. The one she'd picked out herself before that terrible night changed everything. Carmen Morales gripped her husband Diego's hand so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. They sat in the front row directly behind the prosecution table, their eyes never leaving their daughter's small form. Carmen's usually perfectly styled hair looked disheveled, and dark circles under her eyes revealed the sleepless nights that had haunted their family for 3 long months. Diego, normally a man who commanded respect at his job as a high school principal, looked diminished, his broad shoulders curved inward with the weight of helplessness. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh knelt beside the witness stand, her usually confident demeanor replaced by gentle desperation. At 36, Walsh had built her career on her ability to connect with witnesses, to draw out the truth even in the most challenging circumstances. She'd handled dozens of cases involving child witnesses, but Sofia Morales was different. Since that night in March, when an intruder had shattered the family's sense of security, Sofia hadn't spoken a single word. "Sofia, sweetheart," Walsh said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you tell us about that night? About what you saw?" The prosecutor's eyes searched the child's face for any flicker of recognition, any sign that her words were penetrating the wall of silence that had surrounded Sofia for months. The little girl sat perfectly still, her dark eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight ahead at something only she could see. Her hands rested in her lap, small fingers occasionally twitching, but otherwise motionless. To observers, she looked like a porcelain doll, beautiful, fragile, and utterly silent. But those who knew her before that night remembered a different Sofia, a chatty, giggling 3-year-old who sang along to Disney movies at the top of her lungs and peppered her parents with endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether butterflies got cold in winter. Defense attorney Michael Torres watched from his table with a mixture of professional concern and personal anguish. The father of 2 young daughters himself, he understood the family's pain even as he fought to prove his client's innocence. Marcus Chun sat beside him, fidgeting with his tie, a cheap one purchased specifically for the trial from a discount store. Chun's usually confident construction worker's hands trembled slightly as he watched the tiny witness who held his fate in her silence. Judge Patricia Hoffman observed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had presided over family court for over 2 decades. At 58, she'd seen countless children take the witness stand, but the complete shutdown she witnessed in Sofia Morales was unusual, even for a trauma case. The judge had already made the unprecedented decision to allow the testimony to proceed despite Sophia's age and condition, ruling that the child was the only witness to the crime and that justice required every possible effort to hear her voice. Dr. Lisa Kim, Sophia's therapist, sat in the gallery taking careful notes. Over the past 3 months, she'd worked tirelessly with Sophia, trying every technique in her considerable arsenal. Play therapy, art therapy, sand tray therapy, even music therapy, nothing had broken through the wall of silence that seemed to protect Sophia from reliving that terrible night. The child's selective mutism was so complete that even at home with her parents, she communicated only through gestures and facial expressions. The courtroom itself seemed to hold its breath as Walsh tried again. "Sophia, do you remember the night when someone came to your house? The night when you were sleeping?" The prosecutor's voice carried a note of desperation that wasn't lost on anyone present. Without Sophia's testimony, the case against Marcus Chon relied heavily on circumstantial evidence that Torres had already begun systematically dismantling. Sophia's gaze remained fixed on a point somewhere beyond the courtroom walls, as if she were looking through time itself to that night that had changed everything. Her parents had found her the next morning, crouched in her closet behind her stuffed animals, completely unharmed physically, but unreachable emotionally. She'd witnessed something that night, something that had stolen her voice and left her family scrambling to piece together what had happened. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, each second stretching into what felt like minutes. Spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, acutely aware that they were witnessing something profound and heartbreaking. Court reporters poised their fingers over keyboards that remained silent, waiting for words that refused to come. As the morning wore on, it became increasingly clear that traditional methods weren't going to reach Sophia Morales. Her traumatized silence had created an impenetrable barrier, one that threatened to let a possible criminal go free, while an innocent man potentially faced years in prison. The weight of justice itself seemed to rest on the small shoulders of a 3-year-old girl who had retreated so far into herself that no one could find the key to bring her back. Little did anyone in that courtroom know that the key to Sophia's silence was about to walk through the doors on 4 paws, with a wagging tail and gentle brown eyes that would change everything. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B had remained closed for over 2 hours, sealing in the mounting tension and frustration that seemed to grow thicker with each passing minute. Outside in the marble-lined corridor, Tom Richardson paced back and forth, his polished black shoes clicking against the floor in a rhythm that matched his racing thoughts. At 54, Tom had served as a court bailiff for nearly 20 years, and he'd developed an almost supernatural sense for when a case was about to go sideways. This morning, that sense was screaming at him. Tom stopped his pacing and pressed his ear to the courtroom door, hearing the soft, pleading voice of Prosecutor Walsh trying once again to coax words from little Sophia Morales. A silence that followed each attempt was becoming more heartbreaking by the minute. Through the small window in the door, he could see the little girl sitting rigid in the witness chair, her eyes staring at something invisible to everyone else in the room. "This isn't working," Tom muttered to himself, running a weathered hand through his graying hair. He'd seen plenty of difficult witnesses over the years, hostile criminals, nervous victims, confused elderly witnesses, but he'd never encountered anything quite like this. The child's complete withdrawal was unlike anything in his experience, and it was clear that traditional courtroom procedures were failing spectacularly. That's when Tom remembered Rex. 3 months ago, the court system had quietly introduced a pilot program using therapy dogs to assist traumatized witnesses, particularly children. The program was still experimental, used sparingly and only in the most extreme cases. Rex, a 4-year-old golden retriever, had been specially trained by the Canine Companions organization and certified to work in legal settings. His handler, Sarah Martinez, was a licensed therapy dog coordinator who had worked with traumatized children for over a decade. Tom pulled out his cell phone with hands that trembled slightly from both urgency and hope. Sarah's number was programmed into his contacts under Emergency K9, a designation that had seemed almost silly when he'd first entered it. Now it felt like a lifeline. "Sarah, it's Tom Richardson at the courthouse," he said when she answered on the second ring. "I need Rex here immediately. We have a 3-year-old witness who hasn't spoken in 3 months, and the entire case is falling apart. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Sarah replied without hesitation. In the background, Tom could hear the jingle of dog tags and what sounded like Rex's excited whine, as if the dog somehow understood the urgency in the human voices around him. While Tom waited, he approached Judge Hoffman's clerk, Maria Valdez, who was monitoring the proceedings from her desk outside the courtroom. "Maria, I need you to get word to the judge that we have a potential solution coming. A therapy dog. It's part of that new pilot program." Maria's eyebrows shot up. "A dog? In Judge Hoffman's courtroom?" She paused, considering the unprecedented nature of the request. "Tom, you know how strict she is about courtroom protocol. This little girl is the only witness to a serious crime, and she's completely shut down," Tom replied, his voice carrying the weight of his 2 decades of experience. "Sometimes you have to break protocol to serve justice." Exactly 14 minutes later, Sarah Martinez pushed through the courthouse's main entrance with Rex padding calmly beside her. The golden retriever was magnificent. His coat gleamed like spun gold under the fluorescent lights, and his intelligent brown eyes seemed to take in everything around him with remarkable awareness. Rex wore a distinctive blue vest with "Therapy Dog Do Not Pet" emblazoned in white letters, marking him as a working animal with an important job to do. Sarah was a petite woman in her early 40s, with kind eyes that had seen their share of trauma. She'd worked with dozens of children who had been through unimaginable experiences, and she'd watched Rex work what could only be described as miracles. The dog had an uncanny ability to sense exactly what each child needed, sometimes playful energy, sometimes calm companionship, sometimes just a warm, non-judgmental presence. "Fill me in," Sarah said as Tom led them toward the courtroom. Rex walked beside them with perfect heel position, his training evident in every measured step. 3-year-old Sophia Morales, Tom explained quickly. Home invasion 3 months ago. She was the only witness, but she hasn't spoken since that night. Complete selective mutism. They've tried everything: therapists, child psychologists, gentle questioning techniques. Nothing's working, and without her testimony, they might have to let the suspect go free. Sarah nodded grimly. She'd seen similar cases before, children so traumatized that they retreated completely into themselves. Has she shown any response to animals since the incident? "I don't know," Tom admitted. "But right now, Rex might be our only hope." They paused outside the courtroom doors, and Sarah knelt down to Rex's eye level. The dog looked at her with complete attention, his tail still, but his eyes bright and alert. "You ready, boy? There's a little girl in there who needs our help." Rex's tail gave a single, measured wag, as if he understood exactly what was being asked of him. Tom took a deep breath and knocked softly on the courtroom door. After a moment, it opened to reveal Judge Hoffman's bailiff partner, Officer Janet Chun, no relation to the defendant. Her eyes widened when she saw Rex. "Tom, what's emergency therapy dog request?" Tom interrupted quietly. "The witness is completely unresponsive. We need to try something different." Officer Chun glanced back into the courtroom, where she could see Prosecutor Walsh still kneeling beside the witness stand, her voice growing hoarse from repeated gentle pleas. The little girl remained motionless, a statue of traumatized silence. "Let me ask the judge," Janet whispered, disappearing back into the courtroom. Through the crack in the door, Tom could hear the soft murmur of voices as Janet approached the bench. Judge Hoffman's response wasn't audible, but her tone seemed to carry surprise and perhaps a hint of desperation. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, Janet reappeared. "The judge wants to speak with the handler first," she said, opening the door wider. Sarah straightened her blazer and walked into the courtroom with Rex beside her, their footsteps creating the first new sound the room had heard in minutes. Every head turned as they approached the bench, and Tom noticed something remarkable. For the first time since entering the witness chair, Sophia Morales's head moved. Just slightly, just enough to track the movement of the golden dog walking across the courtroom floor. Judge Hoffman leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper, as she addressed Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, I've heard about your program, but I've never had occasion to use it. What exactly are you proposing?" "Your Honor, Rex is trained specifically for situations like this. Traumatized children often respond to animals when they can't respond to humans. The dog provides a non-threatening, comforting presence that can sometimes unlock whatever barrier the trauma has created." The judge glanced at Sophia, then at the frustrated legal teams, and back at Rex, who sat perfectly still in a show position, his intelligent eyes scanning the room as if he were assessing the situation himself. "This is highly irregular," Judge Hoffman murmured, but Tom could hear the hope creeping into her voice. "But these are extraordinary circumstances. Proceed, but slowly. The child's well-being is paramount." Sarah nodded and gave Rex a subtle hand signal. The dog rose gracefully and began walking slowly toward the witness stand, his movements deliberate and calming. Every person in the courtroom held their breath as the golden retriever approached the small, silent figure of Sophia Morales. And then, something magical began to happen. Rex moved across the courtroom floor with the grace of a dancer and the purpose of a soldier. His golden coat caught the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows, creating an almost ethereal glow around his form as he approached the witness stand. Every step was measured, calculated to be as non-threatening as possible. His training had taught him to read human emotion like a book, and right now, every instinct was telling him that the small figure in the witness chair was carrying a burden far too heavy for her tiny shoulders. Sarah Martinez followed at a distance, her experienced eyes tracking both Rex's behavior and Sophia's reaction. In her decade of working with therapy dogs and traumatized children, she had learned to recognize the subtle signs that preceded a breakthrough. The way a child's breathing changed, how their posture shifted almost imperceptibly, the moment when rigid muscles began to relax. As Rex drew closer to Sophia, Sarah noticed the little girl's death grip on the arms of the witness chair beginning to loosen. The courtroom had fallen into a silence so complete that every person present could hear their own heartbeat. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh remained frozen in her kneeling position beside the witness stand, afraid that any movement might shatter whatever fragile magic was beginning to unfold. Her legs had gone numb from maintaining the uncomfortable position for so long, but she didn't dare shift her weight. Judge Patricia Hoffman leaned forward in her chair, her usually stern judicial demeanor softened by curiosity and hope. In her 22 years on the bench, she had never allowed an animal in her courtroom, but desperate times called for unprecedented measures. The weight of potentially letting a criminal go free because a traumatized child couldn't speak was becoming unbearable. Rex reached the base of the witness stand and paused, tilting his magnificent head slightly as he looked up at Sophia. His tail remained still not rigid with tension, but calm with patient waiting. His dark brown eyes, so full of intelligence and compassion, met Sophia's wide, frightened gaze for the first time. Carmen Morales gripped her husband's hand so tightly that Diego had to bite his lip to keep from wincing. They had watched their vivacious, chatty daughter transform into a ghost of herself over the past 3 months. The child who used to wake them up before dawn with excited chatter about her dreams had become a silent specter who communicated only through nods and head shakes. They had tried everything: child psychologists, play therapists, even taking her to visit the family priest, but nothing had broken through the wall of silence that trauma had built around their daughter's voice. Defense attorney Michael Torres felt his pulse quicken as he watched the scene unfold. His client, Marcus Chun, sat beside him with sweat beading on his forehead despite the courtroom's air conditioning. Chun's entire future hung in the balance of whatever was about to happen. If the child could somehow be coaxed into speaking, would her testimony confirm his innocence or seal his fate? Detective Maria Santos leaned forward in the gallery, her trained investigator's mind racing through possibilities. She had interviewed hundreds of witnesses over her 15-year career, but she had never encountered a case quite like this one. The evidence against Marcus Chun was largely circumstantial, built on his proximity to the scene and what prosecutors claimed were stolen items found in his possession. But something about the case had never felt right to her experienced instincts. Rex took another careful step closer to the witness stand, now close enough that Sophia could reach out and touch him if she wanted to. The therapy dog's breathing was slow and steady, his entire demeanor radiating the kind of calm, unconditional acceptance that only animals could provide. He had worked with dozens of traumatized children, and each one had taught him something new about the healing power of patient, non-judgmental presence. Sophia's dark eyes, which had been staring blankly into space for months, began to focus. Really focus. For the first time since that terrible night in March, she was truly seeing something in front of her, instead of looking through invisible barriers into the past. Her small chest rose and fell more rapidly as her breathing quickened. But it wasn't the panicked hyperventilation that her parents had witnessed during nightmares. This was different. This was recognition. Rex sensed the change immediately. His ears pricked forward slightly, and his tail gave the barest hint of a wag. Years of training had taught him to recognize the exact moment when a traumatized child began to emerge from their protective shell. He remained perfectly still, letting Sophia take her time to process whatever emotions were flooding through her 3-year-old mind. The golden retriever's presence seemed to create an invisible bubble of safety around the witness stand. His very stillness was comforting, his patient waiting a stark contrast to the weeks of adults trying to coax words from her with increasingly desperate urgency. Rex asked for nothing. He simply existed, warm and golden, and completely accepting of whatever Sophia was or wasn't ready to give. Sophia's grip on the chair arms loosened completely. Her small hands moved to her lap, then tentatively reached toward the edge of the witness stand, as if she were testing whether this golden apparition was real or just another dream. Her fingertips barely extended over the wooden barrier, but it was the most voluntary movement anyone had seen from her in 3 months. Then, in a moment that would be replayed on national television for weeks to come, Sophia Morale stood up. The movement was sudden but not frantic, decisive but not panicked. She rose from the oversized chair with the determination of a child who had finally found something worth standing for. Her small voice, unused for so long that it came out as barely more than a whisper, cut through the courtroom's silence like a lightning bolt. "That's him." The words hit the courtroom like a physical force. Gasps erupted from the gallery, chairs creaked as people leaned forward, and Prosecutor Walsh's eyes widened with a mixture of relief and confusion. Finally, Sophia was speaking. But as the little girl's trembling finger pointed with unmistakable certainty, everyone in the courtroom realized that she wasn't pointing at the defendant's table where Marcus Chun sat with his mouth agape. She was pointing directly at Rex. "That's the doggy." Sophia's voice grew stronger with each word, 3 months of pent-up trauma pouring out in a rush of recognition and relief. "That's him. The doggy from that scary night." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Defense attorney Torres shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Objection. Your Honor, this changes everything. Prosecutor Walsh stumbled backward, her carefully constructed case crumbling around her like a house of cards. Judge Hoffman's gavel cracked against her bench repeatedly as she called for order, but her own voice carried a note of shock that made her commands less authoritative than usual. In the gallery, Detective Santos felt her world tilt on its axis. A dog. There had been a dog at the scene that night. How had they missed such a crucial detail? How had months of investigation overlooked the presence of another living being during the break-in? Carmen and Diego Morales looked at each other with dawning comprehension and horror. Their daughter's selective mutism hadn't been about seeing an intruder. It had been about the impossible confusion of seeing what looked like a good dog with a bad person. To a 3-year-old mind, the cognitive dissonance had been too much to process. Marcus Chun stared at the golden retriever with growing hope and vindication. He was severely allergic to dogs, had been since childhood. Medical records could prove it. If there had been a dog at the crime scene, he couldn't possibly have been the intruder. But perhaps the most profound reaction came from Rex himself. The therapy dog seemed to understand that something monumentous had just occurred. His tail began to wag slowly, his brown eyes soft with compassion, as he looked up at the little girl who had finally found her voice. He had done what he had been trained to do. He had helped a traumatized child unlock the door to her healing. As the courtroom continued to buzz with shocked conversations and urgent whispers, one thing had become crystal clear. Everything they thought they knew about the case was wrong, and the real investigation was just beginning. Judge Patricia Hoffman's gavel cracked against her bench like thunder, but the chaos in courtroom 3B continued to swirl around the small figure of Sofia Morales, who remained standing in the witness chair with her finger still pointed at Rex. The golden retriever sat perfectly still, as if he understood the magnitude of what had just transpired, his intelligent brown eyes moving between the little girl and the pandemonium erupting around them. Order! I will have order in this courtroom. Judge Hoffman's voice cut through the cacophony, but even her decades of judicial authority couldn't completely contain the shockwaves radiating from Sofia's words. Defense attorney Michael Torres was frantically shuffling through papers, his mind racing with the implications of what they'd just witnessed. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh stood frozen beside the witness stand, her carefully prepared case dissolving before her eyes like sugar in rain. Your Honor, Torres called out, his voice carrying both excitement and urgency. I move for an immediate recess. This testimony has fundamentally altered the entire nature of this case. My client is severely allergic to dogs. We have medical documentation dating back to his childhood. If there was a canine present during the alleged break-in, it's impossible that Marcus Chun could have been the perpetrator. The gallery buzzed with whispered conversations as spectators tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Carmen Morales had tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in 3 months, they were tears of relief rather than despair. Her daughter was speaking. After 93 days of silence, Sofia's voice had returned. Emergency recess, Judge Hoffman declared, her gavel punctuating the decision. I want all counsel in my chambers immediately. Bailiff Richardson, please ensure the witness and her family are taken to a secure private room. And bring the therapy dog. Within minutes, the Morales family found themselves in a small conference room, adjacent to the courtroom, the kind of sterile space typically used for plea negotiations and attorney-client consultations. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the institutional beige walls were broken only by a generic landscape painting that looked like it had been purchased from a hotel liquidation sale. But none of that mattered because Sofia was talking. Mommy, the doggy looks just like the other doggy, Sofia said, her small hand reaching toward Rex, who had positioned himself calmly beside her chair. Her voice was hoarse from disuse, each word seeming to scrape against her throat. But it was the most beautiful sound her parents had heard in months. Dr. Lisa Kim arrived at the courthouse within 20 minutes of receiving the emergency call. The child psychologist had worked with Sophia since the first week after the incident, trying every therapeutic technique in her extensive arsenal. She burst into the conference room with her therapy bag, her usually professional composure cracked by excitement and hope. "Sophia, sweetheart," Dr. Kim said gently, settling into a chair across from the little girl. Rex remained between them, somehow sensing that he was the bridge connecting Sophia to the adult world she had retreated from. "Can you tell us about the doggy you saw that night?" Sophia looked at Rex, then at her parents, then back at the golden retriever who seemed to radiate safety and understanding. "The bad man had a doggy just like this one," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But I was confused because doggies are supposed to be good, and the man was scary." Carmen Morales covered her mouth with both hands, finally understanding the cognitive prison that had trapped her daughter's voice. To a 3-year-old mind, the world was divided into simple categories: good and bad, safe and scary. Seeing what appeared to be a good dog with a bad person had created an impossible paradox that Sophia's young brain couldn't resolve. Dr. Kim nodded encouragingly. "That would be very confusing for anyone, Sophia. Can you tell us more about what the doggy looked like?" "Yellow like Rex," Sophia said, reaching out to gently touch the therapy dog's head. Rex remained perfectly still, allowing the contact that seemed to give Sophia strength. "Big like Rex, but different eyes." The doggy looked sad. Detective Maria Santos had been listening from the doorway, and she stepped forward with the careful movements of someone approaching a skittish animal. "Sophia, do you remember anything about the man who was with the doggy?" The little girl's face scrunched up in concentration, the effort of accessing traumatic memories visible in her expression. Rex seemed to sense her distress and moved slightly closer, his warm presence offering comfort without words. "He had hair on his face," Sophia said finally. "Like Daddy gets when he doesn't shave for a long time, but more. And he smelled funny. Not like Daddy's cologne, but ... ducky." Diego Morales spoke for the first time since entering the room. "Sophia, mi amor, did the man say anything? Did he have an accent like Abuela Maria?" Sophia nodded vigorously. "Yes. He talked like Abuela, but different. Like when we watch those movies where the people talk funny." Her small face brightened with the relief of being understood. "And he kept saying things to the doggy, but the doggy looked scared of him." Dr. Kim exchanged significant glances with Detective Santos. The details Sophia was providing painted a completely different picture of the crime than what had been presented in court. This wasn't a simple burglary by Marcus Chun. This was something else entirely, committed by someone with a canine companion who spoke with what sounded like a regional accent. "Sophia," Dr. Kim continued gently, "you've been so brave telling us about that night. Is there anything else you remember about the man or the doggy?" The little girl was quiet for a long moment, her small hand continuing to stroke Rex's golden fur. The therapy dog remained motionless, seeming to understand that he was serving as both a comfort and a conduit for memories too difficult for Sophia to access alone. "The doggy didn't want to be there," Sophia said suddenly, her voice carrying the certainty that only children possess. "I could tell. Dogs' faces show their feelings, and this doggy was sad and scared. The man was mean to the doggy too." Carmen Morales felt her heart breaking all over again, but this time for a different reason. Her daughter hadn't just witnessed a crime, she had witnessed what appeared to be animal abuse as well, adding another layer of trauma to an already devastating experience. Detective Santos pulled out her notepad, her investigative instincts fully engaged. "Sophia, this is very important. Did you see where the man and the doggy went when they left your house?" "They went to the backyard," Sophia replied without hesitation. "The man was pulling the doggy. and the doggy didn't want to go. I watched from my window until they went through the hole in the fence. The hole in the fence. Detective Santos remembered seeing damage to the Morales family's back fence during the initial investigation, but it had been dismissed as unrelated to the break-in. Now she realized it might have been the perpetrator's escape route. Dr. Kim leaned back in her chair, amazed at the transformation she was witnessing. The child who hadn't spoken in 3 months was now providing detailed, coherent testimony about the night that had traumatized her. Rex's presence had accomplished what months of traditional therapy couldn't achieve. "Sophia," Dr. Kim said softly, "how do you feel right now? After telling us about that scary night?" Sophia looked around the room at all the adults who were hanging on her every word, then back at Rex, who continued to provide his calm, reassuring presence. "Better," she said simply. "I was keeping all the scary pictures in my head, but now they're out. And Rex makes me remember that some doggies are good, even if that doggie was with a bad man." Outside the conference room, the legal teams were in chaos. Prosecutor Walsh was frantically calling her supervisor, trying to figure out how to salvage a case that had just imploded. Defense attorney Torres was preparing motions for immediate dismissal, while also trying to comfort his client, who was experiencing a mixture of vindication and continued fear about his future. But inside the small conference room, surrounded by beige walls and fluorescent lights, a miracle was continuing to unfold. With Rex serving as her anchor to safety, Sophia Morales was not only finding her voice again, she was providing the key to solving a crime that had baffled investigators for 3 months. The real investigation was just beginning, but for the first time since that terrible night in March, justice seemed possible. Detective Maria, Santos's police cruiser, cut through the afternoon traffic with urgency that had nothing to do with sirens or flashing lights. Her mind was racing faster than the engine as she replayed Sophia Morales' testimony over and over, each detail reshaping everything she thought she knew about the case. In her 15 years as a detective, she had learned to trust her instincts, and every instinct had been screaming that something was wrong with the Marcus Chun prosecution from day one. Now she knew why. Her first stop was Riverside Medical Center, where Marcus Chun's medical records painted a crystal-clear picture that should have exonerated him months ago. Dr. Patricia Williams, Chun's longtime allergist, pulled up his file with the efficiency of someone who had dealt with severe cases for decades. "Marcus has one of the worst dog allergies I've ever documented," Dr. Williams explained, scrolling through years of medical history. "We're talking about anaphylactic shock within minutes of exposure to dog dander. He carries 2 EpiPens at all times and hasn't been able to be in the same room as a dog since he was 7 years old." Santos stared at the medical records that chronicled a lifetime of emergency room visits, allergy shots, and careful avoidance of any canine contact. The most recent entry was from just 6 months ago, when Chun had accidentally encountered a service dog at a restaurant and required immediate medical intervention. "Doctor, if Marcus Chun had spent any significant time with a dog, say, during the commission of a crime, what would have happened?" Dr. Williams didn't hesitate. He would have been in severe respiratory distress within 5 minutes. Swollen throat, difficulty breathing, hives covering his entire body. He would have needed immediate medical attention, or he could have died. Santos felt a mixture of vindication and horror wash over her. An innocent man had been sitting in jail for 3 months, while the real perpetrator remained free. She grabbed her phone and dialed Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh's direct line. "Jennifer, we need to talk. Now. I'm at the medical center, and I have documentation that proves Marcus Chun couldn't have committed this crime." 2 hours later, Santos found herself in the Riverside County District Attorney's office, facing a room full of lawyers and administrators, whose faces ranged from embarrassed to furious. District Attorney Robert Hayes, a man who had built his career on his conviction rate, looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past 5 hours. Detective Santos, Hayes began, his voice tight with controlled anger. Explain to me how a critical piece of evidence, like severe dog allergies, was overlooked in our investigation. Santos had been dreading this question, but she had an answer ready. Sir, the initial responding officers noted that Sean was found 3 blocks from the scene with what appeared to be stolen property. The focus was on building a case around the physical evidence and his proximity to the crime. No one thought to ask about allergies because no one knew there was a dog involved. Because our only witness was a 3-year-old who hadn't spoken in 3 months, Walsh added, her voice hollow with the realization of how catastrophically their case had collapsed. What's our exposure here? Hayes asked, the political implications already calculating behind his eyes. Full exoneration, immediate release, probable lawsuit for wrongful imprisonment, Walsh replied. And we're back to square one on finding the real perpetrator. Santos leaned forward in her chair. Actually, we're not back to square one. We have a witness now, and she's given us more information in 1 afternoon than we had in 3 months of investigation. While the lawyers continued their damage control discussions, Santos was already mentally mapping her next moves. She drove directly to the Morales family home, a modest 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood that had been forever changed by one night of violence. Carmen Morales answered the door with Sophia clinging to her leg. The little girl's transformation was remarkable in just a few hours. She had gone from catatonic silence to chattering excitedly about Rex and asking when she would see him again. Detective Santos, Sophia called out, her voice bright with the fearlessness that only children possessed. Are you going to find the bad man who was mean to the doggy? That's exactly what I'm going to do, Santos replied, kneeling down to Sophia's eye level. But I need your help to make sure I look in all the right places. They walked through the house to the backyard, where Santos examined the damaged section of fence that had been dismissed during the original investigation. The break was clean and deliberate, clearly made by someone familiar with the property's layout. On the other side of the fence lay a narrow alley that connected to a network of walking trails used by joggers and dog walkers. Sophia, when you saw the man and the doggy go through the fence, which way did they turn? Sophia pointed confidently toward the left, where the alley curved toward the older section of the neighborhood. That way. The doggy kept looking back at our house, like he was sad to leave. Santos made detailed notes and took photographs, building a timeline and movement pattern that should have been established months ago. As the afternoon sun began to set, she expanded her canvas to include every house within a 6-block radius, focusing specifically on residents who owned dogs. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an elderly woman who lived 4 blocks from the Morales family, proved to be a gold mine of information. She had been awake that night due to insomnia and had noticed unusual activity in the neighborhood. There was a man with a big golden dog around midnight, she recalled, inviting Santos into her living room that overlooked the street. I remember because the dog seemed agitated and the man was yanking on its leash. It struck me as odd because most dog owners in this neighborhood are very gentle with their pets. Can you describe the man? Scruffy looking, with a full beard. He had a backpack and kept looking around nervously. The poor dog looked exhausted, like they'd been walking for a long time. Santos felt her pulse quicken. The description matched Sophia's testimony perfectly. Mrs. Patterson, did you see which direction they were headed? Toward the old industrial district. There's been talk about homeless camps in that area, though the city keeps trying to clear them out. The industrial district was a 15-minute walk from the Morales home, filled with abandoned warehouses and forgotten lots where people's society had overlooked, often made temporary homes. Santos had patrolled those areas during her early years on the force and knew they could be both dangerous and heartbreaking. As darkness fell, Santos called for backup and headed toward the industrial district with a growing sense that she was finally on the right track. Officer Jake Wilson, her longtime partner, met her at the entrance to the abandoned Riverside manufacturing complex. "Maria, what are we looking for out here?" "A homeless man with a full beard and a golden retriever. He's our real perpetrator, and according to our witness, he's been abusing his dog." They spent 2 hours methodically searching the maze of abandoned buildings and makeshift shelters. A beam of Santos's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating forgotten corners where society's most vulnerable tried to survive another day. It was Officer Wilson who found the first real clue: a makeshift shelter constructed between 2 dumpsters behind the old factory building. Fresh dog hair clung to a torn blanket, and the ground was littered with cheap dog food cans and empty bottles. "Someone's been living here recently," Wilson observed, examining the debris with his flashlight. "And they definitely had a dog." Santos knelt beside the shelter, her trained eyes cataloging evidence that painted a picture of desperation and transience. Among the debris, she spotted something that made her heart race: a small silver picture frame containing a photo of a bearded man with his arm around a magnificent golden retriever. But the shelter was empty, and whoever had been living there was long gone. "We need to expand the search," Santos said, standing up and dusting off her knees. "This guy is out there somewhere, and if Sophie is right about him mistreating his dog, that animal might be in danger." As they walked back toward their patrol cars, Santos couldn't shake the feeling that they were close to something big. The evidence was finally starting to point in the right direction, but she knew that finding a homeless man with a dog in a city the size of Riverside would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. What she didn't know was that Jake Morrison and his golden retriever buddy were less than 2 miles away, hiding in another abandoned building and planning their next desperate move to survive in a world that had forgotten them both. The emergency alert went out across every patrol unit in Riverside County at 6:47 a.m. Bolo for homeless white male, mid-30s, full beard, traveling with golden retriever. Suspect wanted in connection with March residential burglary. Approach with caution. Suspect may be unstable. Detective Maria Santos had barely slept, her mind consumed with the hunt for the man who had let Marcus Chun rot in jail for 3 months. She sat in her cruiser outside the Riverside Community Kitchen, watching the morning crowd of society's forgotten gather for what might be their only hot meal of the day. Her instincts told her that someone here would have seen Jake Morrison and his dog Buddy. The soup kitchen was a study in quiet desperation. Men and women of all ages shuffled through the serving line, their faces carrying the weathered look of people who had learned not to expect much from life. Santos approached Margaret Flynn, the kitchen's director, a woman whose kind eyes had witnessed more human suffering than most people could imagine. "Detective Santos," Margaret said, recognizing her from previous investigations. "What brings you here this morning?" "I'm looking for a man with a golden retriever. Bearded, probably in his 30s. Goes by Jake Morrison, though he might be using a different name." Margaret's expression immediately darkened with concern. "Jake and Buddy. Yes, I know them. They've been coming here for about 4 months, but I haven't seen them in over a week. That poor dog ... double quotes." She trailed off, shaking her head. "What about the dog, Margaret?" "Buddy's the sweetest creature you've ever seen. But Jake ... Jake's been getting worse. The drinking, I mean. When he's sober, he treats that dog like family. But when he's drunk, which is most of the time lately, he gets mean. Real mean." Santos felt her stomach clench. Sophia's testimony about the sad doggy was making more sense with each piece of information they uncovered. Has anyone reported him for animal abuse? Who's going to report a homeless man, detective? Most people pretend we don't exist. Margaret's voice carried the bitter wisdom of someone who had dedicated her life to helping the invisible. But I'll tell you something, that dog is the only thing keeping Jake tethered to humanity. If something happens to Buddy, I'm afraid of what Jake might become. Santos spent the next hour interviewing volunteers and regular visitors to the soup kitchen, building a psychological profile of Jake Morrison that was both heartbreaking and terrifying. Vietnam veteran, lost his construction job 2 years ago. Family had disowned him due to his drinking problem. Buddy had been his constant companion since his descent into homelessness, the one relationship that hadn't abandoned him. Her radio crackled to life at 9:23 a.m. Detective Santos, we've got a possible sighting at the old Riverside rail yard. Anonymous caller reported, seeing a man matching the description with a large dog. Units are en route. The abandoned rail yard sprawled across 12 acres of rusted tracks and crumbling infrastructure, a monument to the city's industrial past that now served as an unofficial refuge for the homeless. Santos arrived to find 4 patrol cars already positioned at strategic points around the perimeter. Officer Jake Wilson approached her cruiser as she parked. Maria, we've got him cornered in the old switching station building, but there's a problem. He's got the dog with him, and he's been drinking. A lot. Neighbors reported shouting and what sounded like an animal in distress about an hour ago. Sanctus felt her blood run cold. Is animal control here? On their way, but you know how it is with potentially dangerous situations involving animals. They want us to secure the scene first. They approached the switching station building with tactical precision, but Santos' heart was pounding with more than professional adrenaline. After months of chasing shadows, they were finally closing in on the man who had shattered the Morales family's life and allowed an innocent man to be imprisoned. The building was a hollow shell of brick and broken windows, its interior filled with debris from decades of neglect. Santos could hear movement inside, along with the low, mournful sound of a dog in distress. Jake Morrison. Santos called out, her voice echoing through the empty structure. Riverside Police. We need to talk. The response was immediate and heartbreaking. A man's voice, slurred with alcohol and thick with desperation. Leave us alone. We ain't done nothing wrong. Jake, my name is Detective Santos. I just want to talk to you about what happened at the Morales house in March. No one's going to hurt you or Buddy. A crash echoed from inside the building, followed by a sharp yelp that made Santos' jaw clench. Through a broken window, she could see movement in the shadows, a man stumbling around what appeared to be a makeshift living space, and beside him, the golden shape of a large dog cowering against a wall. I didn't mean to scare that little girl. Morrison's voice cracked with emotion. I thought the house was empty. I needed money for food. For Buddy's food. Santos exchanged glances with Wilson, recognizing the signs of a man at his breaking point. Years of experience had taught her that desperate people in desperate situations could become unpredictably dangerous. Jake, I know you didn't mean to hurt anyone. That little girl is fine now, and she told us about Buddy. She said Buddy looked sad that night. She's worried about him. The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute before Morrison spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. Buddy's all I got left in this world. My wife left me. My kids won't talk to me. Lost my job. Lost everything. But Buddy never judged me. Never left me. Santos took a careful step closer to the building. Jake, I can hear that Buddy needs help right now. Let us in so we can make sure he's okay. I don't mean to be rough with him. Morrison's voice broke completely. It's just ... When I drink, everything gets so dark, and I get so angry at the world, and sometimes ... Sometimes, I take it out on the only thing that can't leave me. The admission hung in the air like a confession at a church altar. Santos knew she was hearing the raw truth of addiction, desperation, and self-loathing that had driven a man to crime and abuse. Jake, I'm coming in. I'm not going to hurt you, but I need to see that Buddy is safe. She nodded to Wilson and 2 other officers to cover the exits. then slowly approached the main entrance of the building. Her service weapon remained holstered. Something told her that this situation required compassion rather than force. Inside, the scene was worse than she had imagined. Jake Morrison sat on the floor against a concrete wall, tears streaming down his face through a beard that hadn't been trimmed in months. Beside him, Buddy lay motionless, his golden coat matted and dirty, his breathing shallow and labored. "Oh, Jake," Santos whispered, her professional detachment cracking at the sight of both man and animal in such obvious distress. Morrison looked up at her with eyes that held the hollow desperation of someone who had lost everything, including hope. "I know I messed up bad, Detective. That night at the house, I was so drunk, I could barely think straight. Buddy tried to stop me from going in, but I dragged him along because I was afraid to leave him alone." Santos knelt down slowly, keeping her movements non-threatening. "Jake, we need to get Buddy to a veterinarian right now. And then you and I need to talk about that night and about getting you some help." "You're going to arrest me," Morrison said, not as a question, but as a statement of inevitable fact. "Yes, Jake, I am. But first, we're going to make sure Buddy gets the care he needs. And then we're going to make sure you get the help you need too." As animal control arrived and gently lifted the injured golden retriever onto a stretcher, Jake Morrison didn't resist when Santos placed the handcuffs around his wrists. The fight had gone out of him completely, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. "Detective," he said as they walked toward the patrol car, "tell that little girl I'm sorry. Tell her Buddy didn't want to be there that night, any more than she wanted us there." The Riverside County Superior Court had never seen anything quite like the scene unfolding in Courtroom 3B on that crisp October morning. Marcus Chun walked through the heavy oak doors as a free man for the first time in 3 months and 17 days. But the weight of his wrongful imprisonment still showed in the careful way he moved, as if he couldn't quite believe his nightmare was finally over. District Attorney Robert Hayes stood before Judge Patricia Hoffman with the kind of humility rarely seen in prosecutors who had built careers on conviction rates. His voice carried genuine remorse as he formally moved for the dismissal of all charges against Marcus Chun. "Your Honor, the state of California formally apologizes to Mr. Chun and his family for a grievous miscarriage of justice. Our investigation was flawed. Our evidence was circumstantial, and an innocent man has paid an unconscionable price for our mistakes." Judge Hoffman's gavel came down with finality that seemed to echo through the packed courtroom. "All charges against Marcus Chun are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Chun, on behalf of this court and the justice system that failed you, I offer my deepest apologies." The gallery erupted in applause, but Marcus Chun stood frozen for a moment, as if the words hadn't quite penetrated the protective shell he'd built during his months behind bars. His sister Linda, who had never stopped believing in his innocence, wrapped him in the embrace that finally broke through his emotional barriers. For the first time since his arrest, Marcus Chun allowed himself to cry. In the witness section, Carmen and Diego Morales watched the scene with mixed emotions. Their daughter's testimony had freed an innocent man, but the trauma that had made that testimony necessary still haunted their family. Sophia sat between her parents, no longer the silent ghost she had been just weeks ago, chattering quietly about when she would see Rex again. 3 rows back, Detective Maria Santos felt the satisfaction that came with genuine police work, the kind that sought truth rather than convenient conclusions. Beside her sat Sarah Martinez with Rex, the golden retriever who had made all of this possible. The therapy dog seemed to understand the importance of the moment, sitting with perfect posture and alert eyes that missed nothing. But perhaps the most compelling figure in the courtroom was Jake Morrison, who sat in the defendant's chair, wearing an orange jumpsuit and the kind of clarity that came from 3 weeks of court-mandated sobriety. His attorney, Public Defender Catherine Ross, had worked tirelessly to craft a plea agreement that addressed both justice and Morrison's desperate need for treatment. Judge Hoffman turned her attention to Morrison, her expression stern, but not without compassion. "Mr. Morrison, you have pleaded guilty to first-degree burglary, animal abuse, and contributing to the wrongful imprisonment of an innocent man. Before I impose sentence, is there anything you wish to say?" Morrison rose slowly, his hands shaking slightly as he unfolded a piece of paper covered with his careful handwriting. His voice was hoarse, but steady as he read the words he had spent days crafting. "Your Honor, there ain't no excuse for what I did. I was drunk, I was desperate, and I made choices that hurt innocent people. Marcus Chun spent 3 months in jail because of my crime, and that little girl stopped talking for 3 months because I scared her so bad." He paused, looking directly at the Morales family. "Sophia, I know you're too young to understand all of this, but I want you to know that Buddy, that's my dog's name, he didn't want to be in your house that night, any more than you wanted us there. Dogs are good judges of character, and Buddy knew we were doing wrong." Carmen Morales found herself wiping away tears at the genuine remorse in Morrison's voice. This broken man wasn't the monster she had imagined for months. He was something far more complicated and tragic. Morrison continued, his voice growing stronger. "I've been drinking since I came back from Vietnam 40 years ago, trying to drown out memories that wouldn't stay buried. Lost my job, my family, my home, everything except Buddy. And in my anger and my sickness, I hurt the one creature that never stopped loving me." The courtroom was completely silent now, everyone understanding that they were witnessing something profound, a man taking complete responsibility for the devastation his choices had caused. "Judge Hoffman, I know I got to pay for what I did, but if there's any mercy in this court, I'm asking not for myself, but for Buddy. He's been my family for 6 years, and despite what I put him through, he never gave up on me. If you could find it in your heart to let him be part of whatever treatment you're going to order for me, I promise you I'll do whatever it takes to become the man he always believed I was." Judge Hoffman consulted the thick file in front of her, reviewing the plea agreement that had taken weeks to negotiate. The sentence was unprecedented in its focus on rehabilitation rather than pure punishment, something that had required approval from the highest levels of the district attorney's office. "Mr. Morrison, this court sentences you to 5 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months, contingent upon your successful completion of intensive substance abuse treatment, psychological counseling, and community service. You will pay full restitution to the Morales family for their trauma and expenses." Morrison nodded, having expected nothing less. "However," Judge Hoffman continued, her voice carrying a note of hope that surprised everyone present, "the court has approved your participation in the California Department of Corrections pioneering animal-assisted therapy program. Buddy will remain in the care of the Riverside Animal Sanctuary, where you will work with him as part of your rehabilitation, under strict supervision and only after you have demonstrated 6 months of sobriety and progress in treatment." The gasp that went through the courtroom was audible. Morrison's knees nearly buckled with relief and gratitude. "Furthermore," the judge added, "upon your successful completion of the program and parole requirements, custody of Buddy will be returned to you, contingent upon regular wellness checks and continued participation in substance abuse maintenance programs." Morrison couldn't speak, but his tears said everything his voice couldn't. In the gallery, Sophia Morales tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, does this mean the sad doggy gets to be happy again?" Carmen pulled her daughter close, marveling at the child's capacity for compassion despite her trauma. "Yes, mi amor. The sad doggy gets a chance to be happy again." As court adjourned, an extraordinary scene unfolded. Marcus Chun, supported by his sister and his newly hired civil rights attorney, approached the Morales family. The meeting was awkward at first, Marcus was still processing his freedom, while the family was still processing their daughter's recovery. "Mr. and Mrs. Morales," Marcus said quietly, "I can't imagine what your family has been through because of what happened to Sophia. But I want you to know that I'm going to use part of my settlement from the wrongful imprisonment lawsuit to fund therapy dog programs for traumatized children. Rex saved your daughter's voice, and programs like that shouldn't depend on luck or chance." Diego Morales, a man who had spent 3 months wondering if justice would ever come for his family, found himself shaking the hand of another victim of the same crime. "Mr. Chun, we are all survivors of that night. We should heal together." As the courtroom slowly emptied, Rex remained at Sophia's side, somehow understanding that his job wasn't finished yet. The little girl who had pointed at him and changed everything was still healing, still processing, still learning to trust the world again. Dr. Lisa Kim watched the interaction between child and therapy dog with professional fascination and personal joy. In her career, she had rarely seen such a complete transformation in such a short time. Sophia was talking, laughing, and engaging with the world around her in ways that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. But perhaps the most significant moment came as Jake Morrison was being led away in handcuffs. Sophia broke away from her parents and ran toward him, causing a moment of tension among the bailiffs. "Mister," she called out, her small voice cutting through the commotion. "Is Buddy going to be okay?" Morrison stopped, turned, and looked down at the brave little girl whose testimony had sealed his fate, but also, somehow, offered him salvation. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Buddy's going to be just fine. And thank you for telling everyone the truth about that night. You're the bravest person I've ever met." As Sophia returned to her parents' arms, everyone in the courtroom understood that they had witnessed something unprecedented, justice that focused on healing rather than vengeance, accountability coupled with compassion, and the possibility of redemption, even in the darkest circumstances. The gavel had fallen, but the real work of healing was just beginning. 18 months after that extraordinary day in Courtroom 3B, the Riverside Community Center was packed with media, legislators, and families whose lives had been forever changed by the power of therapy dogs and the courage of one small girl. The banner hanging across the main stage read, "Sophia's Law, protecting child witnesses nationwide." But the real star of the event was the confident 7-year-old standing at the podium, with a golden retriever puppy sitting perfectly beside her. Sophia Morales was no longer the silent, traumatized child who had once cowered in a witness chair. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, secured with a bright blue ribbon, and her voice rang clear and strong as she addressed the crowd of over 300 people. "My name is Sophia Morales, and this is Hope," she said, gesturing to the beautiful golden retriever puppy beside her. "Hope is my therapy dog, but she's also my best friend and my partner in helping other kids who have been scared like I was." The audience was captivated by the poise and confidence radiating from this young advocate. In the front row, Carmen and Diego Morales watched their daughter with tears of pride streaming down their faces. The transformation from the broken child they had brought to court over a year ago seemed nothing short of miraculous. "When I was 3 years old, something really scary happened to me," Sophia continued, her voice never wavering, despite the difficult subject matter. "I got so scared that I forgot how to use my words. But a very special dog named Rex helped me remember that words are powerful, and that telling the truth can help people." In the VIP section, Rex sat with perfect composure beside Sarah Martinez, now the director of the California Canine Court Assistance Program. The original therapy dog, who had unlocked Sophia's voice, had become something of a celebrity himself, working with over 40 child witnesses in the past 18 months, and achieving a breakthrough rate that had astounded child psychologists nationwide. "Because of Rex, and because of all the people who believed in me, I found my voice again," Sophia said, her confidence growing with each word. And now Hope and I visit other kids who have lost their voices, and we help them find their words too. The legislation that had come to be known as Sophia's law had already passed in 12 states. With federal legislation pending in Congress, the law mandated that courts provide animal-assisted support for child witnesses in trauma cases, funded through a combination of state resources and private donations that had poured in from across the country. Congressman David Martinez, no relation to Sarah, stepped up to the podium as Sophia concluded her remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, in my 20 years in public service, I have rarely seen legislation that addresses such a critical need with such compassion and effectiveness. Sophia's law isn't just about legal procedure. It's about recognizing the humanity and vulnerability of our youngest witnesses, while ensuring that justice can be served. The ripple effects of Sophia's case had extended far beyond the courtroom. Marcus Chun, who had initially struggled with depression and anger following his wrongful imprisonment, had found purpose in advocacy work. His lawsuit against Riverside County had resulted in a $3.2 million settlement, half of which he had donated to establish the Chun Foundation for Wrongful Conviction Prevention. Marcus stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady and full of purpose. My wrongful imprisonment taught me that our justice system, while generally good, is not infallible. But Sophia's courage in finding her voice showed me that even our worst mistakes can become catalysts for positive change. The Chun Foundation has already helped establish new protocols in 47 counties to prevent the kind of rushed prosecution that nearly destroyed my life. In the audience, Detective Maria Santos nodded approvingly. Her investigation of the Morales case had led to her promotion to lieutenant, but more importantly, it had resulted in new training protocols for investigators dealing with cases involving child witnesses. The Santos Protocol now required specific steps to identify and preserve evidence related to animal involvement in crimes, something that could have prevented Marcus Chun's wrongful arrest entirely. Perhaps the most remarkable transformation belonged to Jake Morrison, who participated in the event via video link from the Riverside Rehabilitation Farm, a minimum security facility where he was completing his sentence through the animal-assisted therapy program. On screen, Morrison looked like a different man, clean-shaven, clear-eyed, and sitting beside a healthy, happy Buddy whose golden coat gleamed with proper care. Sophia, I want you to know that Buddy talks about you all the time, Morrison said, with a smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. Well, he doesn't actually talk, but I can tell he remembers that little girl who was brave enough to tell the truth about what happened that night. Morrison had been sober for 14 months and had become a model participant in the rehabilitation program. He worked daily with Buddy and 3 other rescued dogs, training them for therapy work while addressing his own trauma and addiction issues. His transformation had been so remarkable that he had been selected to testify before the state legislature about the effectiveness of animal-assisted rehabilitation programs. I want every family watching this to know that healing is possible, Morrison continued. I hurt people. I hurt an innocent animal, and I nearly destroyed several lives because of my drinking and my anger. But this program, and Buddy's forgiveness, gave me a chance to become someone better. The rehabilitation farm where Morrison was serving his sentence had become a model for similar programs across the country. The combination of substance abuse treatment, psychological counseling, and animal therapy had achieved an unprecedented 89% success rate in preventing recidivism among participating inmates. Dr. Lisa Kim, now the chief child psychologist for the California court system, took the stage to discuss the clinical impact of Sophia's case. In the 18 months since Rex first entered that courtroom, we have documented breakthrough moments with over 200 child witnesses. The presence of therapy dogs doesn't just comfort these children, It literally changes their brain chemistry, reducing trauma responses and allowing access to memories that traditional therapy methods couldn't reach. The statistics were staggering. Courts using therapy dogs had seen a 340% increase in successful testimony from child witnesses, while the children themselves showed dramatically reduced symptoms of post-traumatic stress compared to traditional support methods. As the formal program concluded, Sophia made her way through the crowd with hope trotting beside her, greeting the many families who had traveled from across the country to share their own stories of healing and justice. Each family represented a child who had found their voice with the help of a therapy dog, a prosecutor who had learned to look beyond convenient answers, or a defendant who had received the kind of justice that focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. Eleanor Patterson, the elderly neighbor whose testimony had helped track down Morrison, approached Sophia with tears in her eyes. "Sweetheart, you've given so many people hope. Not just the children, but all of us who believe that good can come from even the worst situations." As the sun set over Riverside, Sophia and her family stood outside the community center, surrounded by the extended family of advocates, legal professionals, and therapy dogs who had become part of their journey. Marcus Chun knelt down to Hope's level, letting the puppy lick his face while Sophia giggled. "Sophia," he said, "you know that your courage didn't just save me from prison. It saved a lot of people, including Jake Morrison and Buddy." Sophia nodded solemnly, understanding far more than most adults gave her credit for. "Rex taught me that sometimes the scariest things can turn into the most important things. And Hope teaches me every day that love is stronger than fear." Carmen Morales watched her daughter with wonder, marveling at how a traumatic experience had transformed into a mission of healing that was touching lives across the nation. The little girl who had lost her voice had not only found it again, she had learned to use it to amplify the voices of countless other children. As they walked toward their car, Sophia turned back once more to wave at the community center, where her journey as an advocate had been celebrated. In just a few years, she had gone from victim to survivor to hero, proving that even the smallest voices could change the world when they chose to speak truth with courage. The legacy of that terrifying night in March had become something no one could have imagined, a movement of healing, justice, and hope that would protect children and serve justice for generations to come. And it all started with a 3-year-old girl, a golden retriever, and the power of finding your voice when it matters most.